hello to Charles, or to remember the great Muhammad Ali. I'm here for a very different and very simple reason. The senior senator from the state of Vermont, Mitch McConnell, is not just Kentucky's senator. Until a few months ago, as you all know, he was the majority leader of the United States Senate. And my God, I am so delighted that today he's only the minority leader. And by the way, we owe that to two great Senate candidates in Georgia. And what they did in Georgia, you could do in Kentucky. But Senator McConnell remains today, as minority Republican leader, the highest-ranking Republican elected official in the country, a man with enormous power. And what I want to do now, which I think as a nation we don't do enough, is to simply compare Senator McConnell's ideology, his Republican ideology, his votes, his actions, and his vision for America with the progressive vision for America. And our vision is that the government should represent all of the people, not just the 1%. Our vision believes that the foundations of government should rest on the pillars of justice, economic justice, racial justice, social justice, environmental justice. That's what we believe. And in order to make an effective comparison between Senator McConnell's views and ideology and ours, let me begin by telling you what you already know. And that is that we are living today in an unprecedented moment in American history, a moment that our children and grandchildren will be reading about in their history books. We have, as a people, endured the worst public health crisis in more than 100 years. We have lost almost 600,000 fellow Americans in every state in this country, and many millions more have become ill as a result of the COVID virus. We have experienced during this period, this last year, the worst economic collapse since the Great Depression of the 1930s. We have seen during this last year millions of Americans marching in the streets to end systemic racism and police brutality, something that unfortunately the people of Louisville are more than familiar with. We continue during this moment in world history to confront the existential threat to our planet of climate change, with the future of the planet and the lives of our children and grandchildren hanging in the balance. And then on top of all of that, we have lived through a violent insurrection in the nation's capital against our democracy, and we are seeing today a strong right-wing movement toward authoritarianism. That's the moment that we are living in. Today in Kentucky, in Vermont and throughout our country, over half of our people are living paycheck to paycheck. This is the wealthiest nation in the history of the world, yet half of our people are working so hard, and at the end of the week, they've got nothing to show for it. And we got millions of other people in Vermont and Kentucky who are working for starvation wages. And on top of all that, we have over 90 million of our people who are uninsured, who are underinsured, and cannot go to a doctor when they get sick. And 1 out of 5 Americans, unbelievably, cannot afford to purchase the prescription drugs their doctors prescribe. How insane is that? Despite an extremely competitive global economy, hundreds of thousands of working class young people are unable to afford college, and many millions more are struggling with outrageous levels of student debt. In America today, as we speak, well over 500,000 of our fellow citizens are homeless, sleeping out on the streets. Gentrification is sweeping the country, driving working class people away from the neighborhoods they grew up in. 18 million households are spending 50% or more of their limited incomes on rent and mortgages. And millions of other Americans are worried about being evicted and thrown out of their apartments or their homes. Unbelievably, in the United States of America during this last year, we have seen working families all across this country, including my own city of Burlington, Vermont, waiting in car lines for emergency food packages to feed their families. It was really stunning to me. Within a mile of where I live, long line of cars of people who have never been in this position before, having to get emergency food packages to feed their kids. In terms of education, millions of our young people, including my 7 grandchildren, have been forced to miss class because of the pandemic and the unprecedented disruption of education in this country. And think what that means to the young people, not only in their loss of academic credit, but in their isolation, their inability to be with their friends. And a lot of kids are suffering today in so many ways because of that. And let's be frank, this past year has been by far the worst and most painful year in the modern history of our country. That's been the simple reality. But in the midst of all that, another point that I want to make to you, it's important that you know this, is that not everybody has been hurting in this country. While tens of millions of Americans have been living in economic desperation, the wealthiest people in this country have become obscenely richer. And it's important that we understand that. During this horrific pandemic, 650 billionaires in America, it's not a lot of people, it's less than the number of people probably who are here right now. 650 billionaires have seen their wealth increase by more than $1 trillion. And again, we don't talk about this for obvious reasons. You don't talk about it in the media. We don't talk about it in Congress. But we have a worse level of income and wealth inequality today than we've had since the 1920s. In America today, 2 people now own more wealth than the bottom 40% of our nation, while the top 1% now owns more wealth than the bottom 92%. Got that? 1% owns more wealth than the bottom 92%, and that gap between the very, very rich and everybody else is growing wider. Brothers and sisters, this is a pivotal moment in American history, and the decisions we make now will impact the future of this planet and the future of our kids and our grandchildren. In the coming months, we have a fundamental decision to make. We have it to make it in Congress. We have it to make it in Louisville, in Burlington, all over this country. Will we create a government, an economy, and a society that works for all of us and not just the 1%? Or will we continue the drift toward oligarchy and authoritarianism, in which a small number of incredibly wealthy and powerful billionaires own and control a significant part of the economy and exert enormous influence over the political life of our country? That is the fundamental question of our time, and you and I know how we've got to answer that question. I'm here in Louisville today not just because Mitch McConnell is a Republican or the leader of the Republican Party in the Senate. I'm here today because Mitch McConnell is working overtime to represent the needs of the wealthy and the powerful and to undermine the needs of working families. To undermine the needs of the elderly, the children, the sick, and the poor. Now, I'm proud to tell you that as chairman of the Senate Budget Committee, I worked hard with President Biden and the Democratic leadership to pass the American Rescue Plan. And as you know, that legislation provided $1,400 in direct payment to every working class adult in this country and their children as well. And I want you to think about it, because the rich may not appreciate it. You know, if you got millions of dollars, what's a few $1,000s? But if you are a struggling family in Kentucky or Vermont, and you got 2 kids, and you got a check for $5,600 in the middle of an economic downturn, that means a lot. That's life and death. And I'll tell you what else we did. For too many years, we have ignored the plight of children in America. Every American should be embarrassed that we have the highest rate of childhood poverty of almost any major country on earth. Disgraceful. This legislation will cut childhood poverty in half in America. And we do that by providing a tax credit of up to $3,600 that is directly benefiting over 1 million children in Kentucky alone. That legislation that we passed, the American Rescue Plan, is substantially reducing hunger in America. It is providing an extra $300 a week in unemployment benefits to more than 100,000 Kentuckians alone who have lost their jobs through no fault of their own. That legislation is preventing millions of families from being thrown out of their homes and onto the streets. And I am proud to tell you that the American Rescue Plan is preventing over 24,000 coal miners and Teamsters here in Kentucky from seeing their pensions slashed by up to 60%. Promises were made to those workers that when they got old, they would have a pension. And years ago, Congress reneged, broke that promise. And I'm happy to tell you we have restored that promise to those workers. I'm happy to tell you that we doubled funding for community health centers all across this country. We tripled funding for after-school programs and summer programs for the kids. And much, much more. I'm proud of all of that. Very proud as chairman of the Budget Committee. But what I am not proud to tell you is that Mitch McConnell led the effort against that bill. And not only voted against it, he was able to convince every Republican in the Senate and the House to oppose it. We passed that bill after 16 hours of debate at 5 o'clock in the morning, when Vice President Harris cast the tie-breaking vote. And I want the American people to remember, when they hear some Republicans touting this or that part of the American Rescue Plan, not one Republican voted for it. We did it alone. And let's be clear, it's not just the American Rescue Plan that Mitch McConnell opposed. As we speak, Senator McConnell is leading the effort against the long-term structural changes that working people in Kentucky, in Vermont, and throughout our country desperately need. He is leading the effort against raising the minimum wage to $15 an hour. He is leading the effort against universal child care, paid family and medical leave, and making it easier for workers to join unions. He is leading the effort against H.R. 1, legislation fundamental to preserving our democracy, legislation which will put an end to the outrageous voter suppression we're seeing all over this country. Legislation which will make it easier, not harder, for people to vote, and legislation which will finally get big money out of politics. And this I will never forget. On New Year's Eve, Mitch McConnell blocked legislation I was offering to provide working-class Americans with a $2,000 direct payment because he claimed it was socialism for the rich. And that's what he said. Of all people in the world to say that. Now, this is a senator who had no problem giving a $129 million tax refund to Amazon as a result of the 2017 tax bill that he championed. It's a man who had no problem giving the Charles Koch family, you know who the Koch brothers are? Well, Charles Koch family received 120, that's a family worth $126 billion. It's a family that's a major contributor to the Republican Party. They got a $1.4 billion tax break. In Mitch McConnell's world, if you are a multi-billionaire campaign contributor, it's okay to receive a $1.4 billion tax break. But if you are a working class person, apparently it's not acceptable to get the help you desperately need. If you are a teacher or a construction worker who makes $75,000 a year, a $2,000 direct payment is, according to McConnell, socialism for the rich. Well, the good news is that McConnell lost that fight. We won it. And the result of that is that household income in America is now surging, and we are moving to rebuild this shattered economy. Working class adults and their kids got the full $2,000 direct payment that they deserved, and which is helping to rebuild our economy. But when we look at Senator McConnell and his Republican ideology, it's not just what he is doing now, it's what he has done in the recent past. Under Trump, he led the effort to try and take away health care from up to 32 million Americans, and to substantially raise the premiums of older Americans by repealing the Affordable Care Act. Now, can you imagine? We are the only major country on earth not to guarantee health care to all. 90 million are uninsured and underinsured, and McConnell's solution to that crisis is to throw over 30 million people off the health care they have. At a time of massive wealth and income inequality, Mitch McConnell led the effort to provide $1 trillion in tax breaks to the 1% and large corporation. He led the effort, and he was the leader of this, to allow billionaires and corporations to buy elections through his strong advocacy of Citizens United, the disastrous Supreme Court decision. Mitch McConnell was the congressional leader in that effort. Now, the question I think that people should be asking is, why is Mitch McConnell doing what he does? How does it happen that Senator McConnell, representing a struggling working class state, is working overtime to block legislation that it would improve the lives of so many working class people in Kentucky, while he is doing everything that he can to make the richest people in America even richer? How does that happen? And the answer is pretty simple. Follow the money. About it. Over the course of his career, and by the way, Mitch McConnell is not alone in this. I don't want to suggest for a moment that he is unique. Many Republicans doing the same, and some Democrats do as well. But over his career, Senator McConnell has received huge campaign contributions from Wall Street banks like Goldman Sachs, Citigroup, JP Morgan Chase, from health insurance companies like Blue Cross, Blue Shield, United Healthcare, and Humana, from pharmaceutical companies like Eli Lilly and Pfizer, from fossil fuel companies like Koch Brothers Industries and Marathon Petroleum, and of course, from Walmart and the NRA. And what do these huge corporations and special interest groups have in common? Why is this such a significant issue? And the answer is they are united in opposing raising the minimum wage to a living wage. And surprise, surprise, so does Mitch McConnell. These corporations oppose guaranteeing health care to all as a human right. So does Mitch McConnell. They oppose taking any significant action to lower the outrageous cost of prescription drugs in America. So does Mitch McConnell. They oppose passing any legislation of significance to combat climate change. So does Mitch McConnell. The NRA has given over $1.2 million in campaign contributions to Senator McConnell, and they oppose virtually every piece of gun safety legislation that has ever been introduced. And what do Senator McConnell's campaign contributors support? They support huge tax breaks for the rich and large corporations. They support deregulating Wall Street, and they strongly supported the Wall Street bailout. They support cutting Social Security, Medicare, and Medicaid. In other words, and this is the important point, Mitch McConnell's top campaign contributors want to do exactly the opposite of what the American people want and need. And so does Mitch McConnell. And so the question is, do we have officials in Washington who obey the dictates of their wealthy campaign contributors, or do we have members of Congress who stand with the working class of this country? That is the issue. Well, it will not surprise any of you to know that I view the world a little bit differently than does Mitch McConnell. Just a little bit. I believe that it is time to restore faith in the American people's belief that government can work for them and not just the few. And what does that mean in concrete terms? It means that we must raise the minimum wage to a living wage of $15 an hour. It means that whether Senator McConnell likes it or not, now is the time to create an economy and a government that works for all of us, not just the few. It means that we have got to understand that health care is a human right, not a privilege. And that we have got to guarantee health care to all through a Medicare for all single-payer program. Actually reducing the cost of prescription drugs. The American people cannot continue to pay, by far, sometimes 10 times more, for the same drugs that people abroad are paying. It means that what we must do is what every other major country does, negotiate prescription drug prices through Medicare with the pharmaceutical industry. It means making public colleges, universities, trade schools, and HBCUs tuition-free and canceling student debt for working families. If we are going to have the best educated workforce in the world, we cannot continue to punish an entire generation of young Americans with a lifetime of student debt. It means making pre-kindergarten, pre-K, and child care universal and available to every family in America. You know, some of my Republican colleagues think we're living in the 1950s where dad went to work and mom stayed home with the kids. Hey, guess what? That world has changed a little bit. Mom is out working now because she wants to and because she has to. And we must guarantee that every mom and dad in this country knows that when they go to work, their kids have quality, affordable child care. We must grow the trade union movement, make it easier for workers to join unions so they can negotiate for better wages, benefits, and working conditions. It means that we must make it easier, not harder, to vote and prevent billionaires from buying politicians by moving to public funding of elections. And right now, and you're going to hear a lot about it in the coming weeks as we move forward on a new piece of legislation, we must demand that the wealthiest Americans and most profitable corporations start paying their fair share of taxes. It is unacceptable that we continue to allow profitable corporations like Nike and Federal Express to make billions of dollars in profits and yet pay nothing in net federal income taxes over the past 3 years. Not acceptable. Warren Buffett, one of the richest guys in America, reminds us that working class people pay an effective tax rate that is higher than billionaires pay. Not acceptable. It means passing legislation to create humane immigration reform and a path toward citizenship. We can no longer tolerate children in this country, and I've met many of them all over this country, living in fear that one day their parents will no longer be at home when they come back from school. It means ending systemic racism in America. And creating real criminal justice reform and ending the disastrous so-called war on drugs. Yes, we must legalize marijuana in every state in this country and expunge marijuana arrest records. We must abolish private prisons and detention centers and end cash bail. No more profiting off of locking people up and throwing them in jail. And that is some of what our progressive agenda is about. Much more, but that's some. And yes, if Republicans refuse to work with us, if Senator McConnell and Republicans in the Senate continue their strategy of obstructionism, it means passing a progressive agenda through the Senate with 51 votes instead of 60 by using budget reconciliation. And I say that as chairman of the Senate Budget Committee. The American people are hurting. They want action. They want action now, and we've got to deliver for them. And when my Republican colleagues complain about our use of reconciliation, let me remind them of this. When Mitch McConnell was the majority leader, he used the reconciliation process to pass trillions of dollars in tax breaks, primarily for the top 1% and multinational corporations. He used reconciliation to drill for oil in the Arctic National Wildlife Refuge. Further, he was able to confirm 3 right-wing Supreme Court justices over a very short period of time by a simple majority vote. In my view, if Senator McConnell could use the reconciliation process to give tax breaks to billionaires, we can use that same process to stand up for the working families of this country. My friends, the difference in ideology between Senator McConnell and myself, between the Republican Party and the progressive movement, is not a question of big government versus small government. That's not what it's really about. It is a question of whose interests the government represents. It's a question of whether you fight for the needs of the wealthy and large corporations who fund your campaigns, or whether you fight for the needs of working families, many of whom, Black and white and Latino, Asian American, Native Americans, are facing today economic desperation. The choice is very clear. If you believe in a vibrant democracy and not oligarchy or authoritarianism, if you believe that all Americans are entitled to economic security and that we must stand with the working families of this country, if you believe that all people, regardless of race, country of origin, or sexual orientation, are entitled to equal justice, if you believe in environmental sanity and combating climate change, the choice could not be clearer. Let us go forward and build the progressive movement and create a government that works for all, not just powerful special interests. Thank you very much.